Title: The House Without a Shadow. Everyone in the village of Pagoda knows about the thatched house by the Baotrang riverbank. The only house with no trees around it, no shade at any time of day. Sunlight pours onto its roof from dawn till dusk, like something deliberately trying to expose what lies beneath. That house used to belong to an old teacher named Mr. Kung. He came from elsewhere, spoke with a thick, strange accent like someone from the highlands, and taught classical Chinese and charms to the locals. He arrived on a stormy day with thunder roaring for 3 straight nights. The entire village plunged into darkness. On the 4th day, the clouds parted, and he built his thatched hut right on the spot where, long ago, 3 drowned bodies, mother and 2 children, had been buried after the famine. At first, no one dared approach. But then word spread. He taught kids for free, fed the poor, and told ghost stories about wind-eating spirits and the standing dead. When people noticed their kids slept better and stopped wetting the bed after studying with him, they grew respectful. He lived simply, ate once a day, not read scriptures at night, and drew charms by oil lamp. Some saw him digging a deep hole behind his house and sprinkling ashes over it, saying it was to keep the land's breath undisturbed. At night, fishermen claimed to see a white shadow crouching in his yard, but when they approached, it vanished. When asked, he would only say, "That's just my shadow. I've lived long enough that it's learned to think for itself." Things stayed quiet until one of his students, a girl named Na, drowned on the 1st day of the month. Her body never floated. It wasn't until the full moon on the 15th that her corpse surfaced, clutching a handkerchief with blood-written Chinese characters. Her mother secretly brought the cloth to Mr. Kung. He looked at it, shook his head, and whispered, "It's not mine." That very night, Na's house caught fire. No one was hurt, but every plant around it withered, and the soil turned black as coal. Whispers started, the teachers raising spirits. The rumors grew, but when authorities came, he was just an old man with books. No proof. Then, one by one, his former students disappeared. One fell down a well, another swept away by flood, others moved to the city and never contacted their families again. The village avoided his house. It decayed quickly. Yet strangest of all, though the sun beat down from every angle, the house cast no shadow. From morning to evening, it remained eerily detached from the sunlight. And at night, no matter how bright the moon, darkness clung to it like tar. I was a child then, living with my grandmother. One day, passing by to catch grasshoppers, I kicked at his wooden door. My grandma slapped me so hard I saw stars, dragged me home in tears, yelling, "Touch that house and your shadow won't come back." I asked, "Why would it take my shadow?" She answered, "Because he no longer has one. He borrows from others. Once it's gone, you'll never be whole again." When I turned 17, Mr. Kung died. No one knew how long he'd been dead. They found his body dried like a mummy, seated upright on a mat, still gripping a brush halfway through writing the character. Vo, meaning emptiness. No one dared to bury him. Officials tried to remove his corpse. But as they reached the village crossroad, the truck broke down. When they returned, the body had vanished. All that remained was a charred, round mark like a drum's face where he'd sat. The house collapsed soon after, but no one dared dig up the foundation. Later, the village tried planting a tamarind tree there. It never grew leaves. Each year, it bore a single fruit, jet black, finger length, and when it fell, it crumbled into ash. Last year, I returned home and visited that spot. The tamarind tree still stood, leafless and pale like a stone sculpture. But when I approached, the midday sun above me suddenly dimmed. I looked up, nothing blocked it. But when I looked down, my shadow was gone. And from beneath the roots of the tree, I heard a voice, my own voice, call out, "Give me back my shadow." Title: The Bell of Phong on Pagoda. Phong on Pagoda lies hidden deep within a bamboo forest, over 10 kilometers from the nearest town, reachable only by muddy dirt paths. Few dare to visit. Old folks say the pagoda was once bustling, famous for its spiritual power. But after a fire in 1968, the main hall was reduced to ashes. More than 20 monks perished on the night of the lunar 7th-month full moon, their scorched bodies found clutching the great bronze bell in the courtyard. Since then, no one dared to rebuild it. The forest grew wild, covering nearly all traces of its existence. But strangely, On every full moon night of the 7th lunar month, 3 bell chimes are still heard, deep, hollow, and bone-chilling. I first heard this story from my grandfather, a former forest ranger in that area. He warned me, hearing the first chime is fine. Hearing the second, don't turn around. But if you hear the third and you're still standing there, they've already called your name. I laughed, assuming it was just an old tale meant to scare kids. At 25, I went trekking with 3 friends. One weekend, we stumbled into the bamboo forest where the old pagoda once stood. It was late afternoon, but we wanted to explore further. I was the one who suggested we go deeper, searching for remains of the pagoda to photograph. No one objected. The ancient bamboo forest was eerily silent, sunlight filtering through the leaves in strange patterns that looked like hundreds of bowed figures. About an hour in, we found a moss-covered clearing. At the center stood a mound of earth with a weathered black stone protruding from it. Cracked and rough, it took a moment to realize it was the rim of an old buried bell. Chinese characters faintly etched around its edge. Excited, I exclaimed, "It's the Great Bell!" I climbed the mound and tapped the bell with a dry bamboo stick. The sound that echoed was deep and low. My whole body went cold as if dunked into a stone well. My friends laughed, but then the forest wind stopped. Dead silence. No cicadas. No rustling leaves. Then the second chime rang out. This time, it didn't come from my hand. It came from inside the bell, like something was striking it from within. I froze. One of my friends whispered, "Why is it so cold? Who just called my name?" We looked at her in alarm. No one had spoken. I tried to jump down from the mound, but then the third chime rang out. This one sharp like a blade scraping metal, piercing straight through my skull. We all turned to flee. I was the last to run. But the deeper I ran, the more everything repeated. The path looked the same, the trees unchanged. No matter how far I ran, I circled back to the same bell, the same mound. My friends were gone. I shouted their names. No answer. Eventually, I stumbled onto a small trail. Night had fallen. The sky was ink black. I turned on my flashlight. Ahead stood a man in a faded monk's robe, his back to me, bald head glinting faintly in the light. "Master, do you know the way out?" I called. He turned around. His face had no nose, no mouth. Only 2 hollow black eyes stared back. He didn't speak, just raised a 6-fingered hand, pressed one finger to where his lips should have been, and gestured, "Silence." Behind me, the bell chimed again. I ran, tumbling down a slope. Everything went black. I woke at dawn, lying at the edge of the forest near the road. A man carrying firewood shook me awake, saying he'd seen me wandering all night, eyes wide open, mumbling strange phrases in broken Chinese. I grabbed my phone. All the photos from yesterday were distorted, blurry, but one thing was constant. In every corner of every frame, a figure in monk's robes holding a mallet, face blurred beyond recognition. My friends all made it home safe. But a week later, the girl who said she heard her name lost her mind. She wept each night, claiming a voice was calling her from inside the bell, inviting her to attend a ceremony at the Shadow Pagoda. 3 days later, she vanished. Left behind only one sentence, scrawled on her wall. The third bell belongs to the dead. Title, The Knocker at the Hour of the Ox. In my village, there's an unspoken rule. After 1 a.m., no matter how many knocks you hear at the door, you must never open it. The elders call it the Hour of the Ox, the time when the living and the dead cross paths, when shadows stretch longest, and when things that shouldn't be named can walk among humans. Any house that opens its door during that hour may no longer belong to the living. I used to laugh at that. It sounded like the kind of story old people made up to keep kids in bed. After my parents died in a car crash, I left Saigon and returned to the countryside to live with my grandmother. Her house stood near the levee, with yin-yang tiles on the roof, moss-covered walls, and a floor of worn red bricks. It felt cut off from the world. The bamboo hedges in front whispered endlessly in the wind, even on days when the rest of the village was completely still. The first night, I lay listening to the wind when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, rhythmic. I opened my eyes. The clock read 1:13 a.m. Thinking maybe someone from the village needed help, I got up and opened the door. There was no one there. But the tiles on the doorstep were wet, though it hadn't rained. A set of bare footprints, tiny like a child's, stood just outside the threshold. I shivered and slammed the door shut. When I turned around, my grandmother was already in the center of the room, her wrinkled face lit by the warm, flickering glow of a kerosene lamp. "You opened it, didn't you?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded. She sighed, placing a hand on my head. "It's okay. The first time, it only watches." I asked who it was. She didn't answer. From that night on, the knocking came every single night, just past 1 a.m. 3 knocks. Always 3. I tried to ignore it. But on the 7th night, I opened the door again, this time determined to catch whoever was playing games. There was no one outside, but just as I bent to examine the ground, a voice, low and breathy, whispered right beside my ear, "This time, I can come in." I spun around. No one. But when I looked into the mirror in my room, I saw myself and someone else. A child, pale, eyes black and bottomless, mouth stretched unnaturally wide, torn at the corners. It stared at me from just over my shoulder. I turned quickly, nothing behind me. From that night, everything changed. I'd wake up to find the rice pot's lid removed. The mirror in my room fogged over, though I wasn't even breathing near it. Grandmother's cat stopped eating, sat in the corner staring at the ceiling, hissing. Grandma herself began to wither. She clutched prayer beads constantly, chanting nonstop. When I asked what was happening, she said, "The thing you invited in doesn't want to leave." That night, I set my phone to record the living room. At 1:45 a.m., the door opened by itself. There was no wind, yet the bamboo blinds lifted straight up. A shadow slipped inside. Not walking, crawling, dragging itself on elbows and knees. Its eyes glowed faintly red. When I reviewed the footage, my phone shut off. When I turned it back on, the video was gone. I started seeing it in dreams. Every night, I lay paralyzed and it perched on my chest. With one skeletal finger, it scratched across my skin. "Say my name." I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. Sweat soaked through my shirt. When I woke, angry red marks lined my chest, exactly where it had scratched. Grandma saw and wept. "I should have warned you better. If you say its name, it'll take your voice forever." I didn't believe her. Until the next morning. I couldn't speak. My throat didn't hurt. It wasn't swollen. I simply could no longer make a sound. Doctors found nothing wrong. Grandma took me to a shrine deep in the forest. There, a nearly 100-year-old medium looked at me once and muttered, "He's been claimed by the knocker, heard the 3rd knock and gave no offering. His soul's incomplete." The ritual lasted 3 hours. She burned effigies and had me write my full name on a piece of gold paper. That night, I dreamed I was walking barefoot through a graveyard. Eventually, I arrived at a house. It looked exactly like Grandma's. And on the porch, I was sitting there, smiling at myself, raising my hand to knock 3 times. I screamed in the dream, "I won't open anymore." And when I woke, I could speak again. I told Grandma everything. She said, "You're lucky you saw yourself in the dream. Others who hear the 3rd knock never wake up again." I left the village after that, but sometimes on sleepless nights in the city, I still hear it. Soft, faint. 3 knocks. Title, The Gravekeeper. At the far edge of Maso Field, beside a dense thicket of thorny bamboo, there stood an old thatched hut, home to the village's generations of gravekeepers. No one remembered when the tradition began, but the role passed from one to another. Old Man Tu, the gravekeeper, then Uncle Num, the gravekeeper, and finally Dung, the youngest ever chosen. Dung wasn't born in the village. He was an orphan raised by the abbot of Kokwang Pagoda. When he came of age, he asked to stay in the village, quietly taking over the lonely role of tending to the cemetery, lighting incense, pulling weeds, keeping the graves tidy. The villagers respected Dung for his kindness, but they also avoided him because Dung spoke to the dead. Every afternoon, he walked the cemetery paths, mumbling greetings to each grave. "Aunt Ba, is your leg still aching?" "Uncle Sao, you must miss your grandchildren." "Little Lin, the sky's beautiful today, isn't it?" Some people followed him in secret and saw him sitting for hours by a mound with no headstone, overgrown with wild grass, laughing softly as if listening to a story no one else could hear. The abbot once said, "He's always had a spiritual bond. Where others fear graves, he finds comfort." But one day, Dung dug up something he shouldn't have. During a cleanup of an overgrown section, he unearthed a flat stone buried deep in the earth. Underneath, he found a small ceramic funerary jar, an ancient ossuary pot used for reburials. On its lid was an eerie carving, a human face, twisted in a crooked smile, eyes sunken deep. At the bottom of the jar was a yellowed scrap of oiled paper, tightly wrapped, bearing a message. Do not open. The thing inside does not sleep. Dung, normally cautious, found himself compelled. That day, for reasons he couldn't explain, he opened it. There were no bones, only a clump of long, damp black hair that still smelled faintly of incense, and a finger, a woman's finger, still wearing a cracked jade ring. That night, the cemetery stopped being quiet. Dung awoke to the sound of knocking on his hut wall. Knock, knock, knock. He opened the door. No one was there, but in the mud below, bare, muddy footprints. One single foot, small, female. He followed them, and they led to the nameless grave he had always spoken to. The earth was disturbed, the grass uprooted. Draped over the mound was a white ow dye, soaked as though someone had crawled out of the dirt. Panicked, he ran to the pagoda to fetch the abbot. But when they returned, everything was gone. From that night on, every evening brought whispers, low, breathy, persistent. A woman's voice circled his hut, calling softly, Dung, Dung, look at me. I'm cold. At first, he prayed. Then he hung wind chimes carved with protective glyphs, burned entire bundles of incense, hung mirrors and talismans. But nothing stopped the voice. On a misty moonlit night, Dung saw her. A woman in white drifting silently through the field. Her hair trailed behind her, black and endless. She didn't walk. She glided just above the graves. She stopped at each headstone, tilting her head as if listening. At the nameless grave, she knelt, then began to dig, scratching, tearing at the earth with her bare hands. Stop! Dung shouted. She turned, her face, the same as the one carved into the ossuary lid, distorted, hollow eyes, but her smile was bright, too wide, almost joyful. I just want to know who I am. Then she vanished. The next day, Dung reburied the jar, sealing it with 7 layers of protective scripts. After that, the whispers stopped. He no longer spoke to the dead like before. No more soft greetings, no more laughter with the unseen. He simply walked the cemetery in silence, lighting incense, replacing wilted flowers. At the nameless grave, he lingered longer than anywhere else, his hand resting gently on the soil. Someone once asked, why not just dig up that grave? Clear it. Get rid of the curse. Dung only shook his head. Some people die without a name. If we forget them, they'll wander forever. Until someone dares to say their name again. Title, the Coffin in the Cliffside. I once joined a geological survey team heading deep into Kavak village, a mountainous region on the border of Laos. No phone signal, no paved roads, just mist, ancient forests, and slopes so steep they looked like vertical stone walls. On our first night, we stayed at the home of Old Man Tong, the village elder. As we gathered around the fire, he shared a story that sent a chill through everyone's spine. Up on the slopes of Mount Ko-Ro, there's a stone coffin wedged into the side of a cliff. No one put it there. It's been there for centuries. On cloudy nights, people say they hear knocks, like someone is tapping from inside. I thought it was just a spooky tale meant to scare outsiders, so I laughed. But Old Man Tong didn't. Now that you've heard it, remember this. Don't go up the mountain in the late afternoon, and whatever you do, never touch the coffin. I forgot his warning. The next day, while scouting for a good place to install our geomagnetic instruments, I strayed from the group and followed a faint old trail. The path narrowed, carpeted with rotting leaves. The higher I climbed, the colder it got. After weaving past a massive boulder, I found a narrow crevice in the cliff, just wide enough for one person. Light filtered through a gap in the rock above, illuminating what lay beyond. A coffin. Roughly 2 meters long, carved from solid green stone, coated in moss. But the lid wasn't sealed. A thin black line marked the gap, twisted and uneven, like the smirk of someone keeping a terrible secret. I lifted my phone to snap a photo. The screen went black. The battery died. And then I heard it. 3 knocks from inside the coffin. Knock, knock. I froze. That sound wasn't from rocks or wind. It came from inside the stone box. Then a whisper followed. Low, hushed, human. Open it. I'm so cold. I ran, but the way back had vanished. I turned and twisted through the fog-choked forest, but every turn led me in circles. All around me, I could hear footsteps, but never saw anyone. Eventually, when my legs were close to giving out, I saw a woman. cloaked in black, long hair covering her face, standing beside a gnarled tree. I called out, "Miss, can you help me?" She didn't respond. She simply raised one arm and pointed back toward the cliff. I stumbled away, tripped, and struck my head on a rock. When I regained consciousness, I was in the team's tent. They said they found me unconscious near the stream hours later. But here's the strange part. Ever since that day, I've had a deep bruise shaped like a handprint on my shoulder. It never faded. Doctors found nothing wrong. But the nightmares began. Every night, I dream of standing in front of that coffin again. And this time, I'm inside it, eyes wide open, blood trickling from my mouth, and I'm the one knocking. Knock, knock, knock. This time, you're the one inside.